You hear some guns going off in the background. There's a lot of hunting goes on around here. We have deer and elk and exotics and wild hogs. They come up here every night to the door of the house. I hate that shooting. It's really ought to be illegal to fire a weapon this close to somebody's house. To start out with, I give you a little bit of a background on an old friend of mine. I called him Junior. His real name was Frank. Now, Frank Morris told me that there was a triad in my life. Just like the triads in his life. He was referring to him and the Anglin brothers, and him and the Dan Cooper jump, the escape from Alcatraz, the Zodiac killer. Those two of his triads. And the triad that he was referring to of mine was about the three Franks in my life. One was him, the other was Junior, because his real name was Frank, and my dad's name was Frank. I didn't know what the killer was talking about at the time, but now I do. It's another one of those things that I figured out after spending a year now studying the Zodiac killer and trying to piece together what really transpired 45 years ago when I knew this guy. I wanted to tell you about how the Zodiac killer came across the idea for his mask. One thing that I wanted to let you know about the irony that goes along with this killer is that he told me that he only used that mask one time, and then he was so impressed with how the press grabbed a hold of that and made a big deal out of it. Now, keep this in mind. Listen to my words. He said, I only used that mask one time, and I didn't even wear it. He said that it was someone else that wore it. And he explained to me his friend Art was the one that wore the mask. He explained to me enough things about his friend Art for me to piece things together that he was talking about Arthur Lee Allen. That's how Art got blamed for being the Zodiac killer. And he borrowed a pair of shoes from him, a pair of wing-walker boots that we used to call them chukka boots in the Air Force, because Arthur Lee Allen was in the Air Force. And when he was wearing those boots, he walked around and left footprints so that the law enforcement officials would think that Art was the killer. He was always trying to tangle other people up in what he was doing to get them blamed for it. It was one of his ways of misleading the officials. He actually never wore the mask to a crime, at least not that he admitted to, but he did wear the mask around my house one time, and I'm going to tell you how that happened. This is where he got the idea for the mask. My friend Frank, I call him Junior, we were, teenagers. I want to say we were around 13, 14. And Junior used to come over to my house at night. My dad wouldn't let me go outside at night. It's probably a good thing. It's probably why I'm still alive, with the Zodiac killer lurking around out there. This was in Tampa, Florida. And my friend Junior used to come over and talk to me through the window. His parents would let him go out at night. Mine wouldn't. He'd talk to me for 20 or 30 minutes before it got too late at night, and then he'd go home. Well, one day he comes up to the window and he says, David, look outside. Look at me. And I looked out there, and he was wearing a mask that he had made. It was a grocery bag, painted black, with holes cut in it for eyes, and it had an X right here on the chest. Now, Junior had this thing about a guy he called Mr. X. It was kind of a joke, but his mother used to try and scare him to get him to do things or not to do things or not to go places he shouldn't go or whatever by telling him that Mr. X was going to get him. So he made this mask and he was laughing about it. And I don't know if it was that same night or the next night, I recall smelling cigarettes out there, and we were in a rural area. There weren't a lot of people out at night when Junior was out there talking to me. He was usually alone, and I smelled cigarettes, and Junior said, "There's a guy over there." And I said, "Really?" I imagine, because I smell cigarettes. And he goes, we talked a little more, and he looked and he said, "Damn, there's two of them now, and they're staring at me." And then we talked a little, and he looked back over there, and he kind of stepped back, and he goes, "Wow, David, there's three of them now, and one of them's got a gun." And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, he's showing it to me." There were crimes, missing persons, and one boy that got cut up, and a couple of kids that got killed, stabbed to death, down at the at 6 Mile Creek at the local swimming hole where the Zodiac killer had built a dam to attract kids. And that all happened around the time of this issue with the mask. Well, I recall Junior looking at these guys and saying, "Hey, I'll tell you what, put the gun away, I'll take all three of you on." And then I yelled out the window, "Yeah, and I'm going to help, and I'm going to get a gun." And I go, "This is spooky." So I yelled out, "I'm going to go get the gun," and come outside, and I yelled at my sister's name, and I said, "Go get that shotgun and go around the other way. I'm going to go up over the roof." And these guys ran away. Now, this was during the time of the 6 Mile Creek thing. I'm going to put a link on here so you can see that video, where the Zodiac killers, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, had just escaped from Alcatraz, and they went to Florida. Now, this makes sense because the Anglin brothers are from Ruskin, Florida, which is about 20 miles from Tampa, which is where I lived. Well, the next night, Junior come back and started talking to me, and I told him, "Hey, Junior, I smell cigarettes again." And he looked over there, and he goes, "Yeah, those guys are back." And I go, "Yeah, what are they doing?" He goes, "Wow, one of them's wearing a mask like the one I made." And I'm like, we got really freaked out. And he goes, "Damn, David, that guy's pointing a gun at me." And I told him, "Run around in front, I'll come outside." And I yelled it out really loud, "I'll come outside with a gun." And I went and got a gun, and I went outside, and we stood out there and talked for a while, and he finally went home. And the next day at school, we decided he wasn't going to be coming out at night anymore to talk to me. Now, that's where the Zodiac killer got the idea for his mask. And I'm going to tell you about that because he told me about it in Mexico City about 5 years later. When I was 17 and I went to Mexico City to study Spanish, and I met the killer down there, he told me that he got the idea of the mask from some kid that he saw wearing it. And he wouldn't tell me any more details on it, but I'm pretty sure that it was my friend Junior, because I think he scared them so bad by telling them he was going to fight them all if they put the gun away, that they ran away. And then the next day they come up with this great idea of wearing the mask and showing him the gun again. They were really into scaring people. This Halloween and fear thing before they murdered somebody was really a big deal to them. And they, I think, followed us around and tried to have their fun with us, but we seemed to always be able to outsmart them. I mean, we knew our neighborhood well, and we were always outside. We were outdoors people, which they were also, which is part of what brought us together so many times. These old girls keep me going. They're like pets. They come around to see me once in a while. Look at this little guy. I should say girl. What are you yawning for? You sleepy? Go back to bed. It's early. It's about 7:30 here. Time for me to take my daughter to school. I love this outdoor ranch life. It just gets too hot here. I'd rather be up in those mountains in Donner Pass. Just got done dropping the kids off at school. I was going to follow up with you on the story about my friend Junior. I forgot to tell you, Junior passed away a couple of years ago. And poor guy, he went to his grave not knowing anything about this Zodiac thing of mine. Although I do recall him telling me one time when we were kids that he thought that the guy I knew in Mexico City was the Zodiac killer, and his mother thought that. When pictures of the Zodiac killer with the mask came out in the newspaper, he cut out an article and he brought it over and showed it to me, and he said, "Look, there's the mask I made." And he laughed about it, and we didn't really make the connection, but he made a joke about, I wonder if that was those three guys that wore the mask that night. And, you know, we just kind of laughed it off. It was those three guys that wore that mask, the same three guys. They took that idea from Junior and they took it to California. And I guess the point that I want to make here is that, you know, Frank himself, the killer himself, told me that he only used the mask one time. And he said that it wasn't even him that wore it. So he was trying to make a point about how the press sensationalized that mask. And to this day, when people think Zodiac killer, they see in their mind the picture of him wearing that mask. And he only wore it one time. Well, there were a few other times, but no times that really turned into anything. He wore the mask several times trying to scare me and trying to kill me. And he wore it that night when he showed it to Junior. And I also want you to know that I don't believe that it was him that wore it. He mostly gave instructions to John Anglin, and John would do whatever he said. So I'm pretty sure John was the one that, whenever they were together and getting ready to do their crimes, I'm pretty sure that John was the one that handled the knife and handled the gun, and consequently would have been the one that wore the mask, because Junior said that the guy that was wearing the mask pulled the gun on him. Frank, you know, I could see Frank sneaking up behind somebody and shooting him with a gun, but I couldn't see him trying to handle a gun or a knife around people who was just too afraid of everything to do something like that. A lot of the murders, I think John did them, and Frank just watched. He got the pleasure out of seeing the death and seeing people scared and in pain. These guys were really sick, and what made them so good at doing what they did and not getting caught was the fact that there was 3 of them. Wherever they went, whatever they did, it was 3 against 1. And they planned everything out methodically. They're taking out some kind of hatred for women and aggressive behavior. You know, these guys escaped from Alcatraz, perpetrated crimes and murders all across the country. They were at the Kennedy assassination. Frank told me that he was trying to find a way to put a pistol inside of a camera so that he could shoot the president in his motorcade in Dallas at the time when the president got shot. He said, you know, and I asked him, did you went down there to assassinate the president? And then he said no, and he changed the story. But the one thing that he did say that I recall about that was that I went down there to kill the president. Hell, I didn't have to. Somebody did it for me. And I asked him who he thought killed him, and he said there were a lot of people that wanted that guy dead. He said that he heard at least 10 gunshots down there in Dealey Plaza the day that President Kennedy got killed. Frank and the Anglin brothers immigrated to Mexico City so that they could continue murdering people without getting caught. And they had a lot more people to pick from, 22 million people. Let's go in here to Starbucks. I need a lift.